What's happening in the Ukraine-Russia crisis? Tensions between NATO and Russia have risen to their highest level in years, as Washington and its European allies attempt to deter a potential invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces massed at the border. Europe ramps up Ukraine crisis diplomacy amid extreme tension, as Kremlin calls on West to accept its demands. The latest developments return to menu. French President Emmanuel Macron met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv Tuesday as part of his plan to de-escalate between Russia and NATO over Ukraine's potential membership in the alliance. The visit comes after Macron held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin for 5 hours inside the Kremlin Monday. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Tuesday that a de-escalation of the crisis was urgently needed, but he complained that the United States and NATO had not addressed Russia's security demands. President Biden also met Monday with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. After the talks, Biden said that the Nord Stream 2 project, a Russian-owned pipeline built to transport gas to Europe, would be abandoned if Russia sent forces to Ukraine. A grim U.S. assessment reported Saturday concludes that Russia may soon complete preparations for what appears to be a large-scale invasion. The review predicted that a war could cause Ukraine's government to collapse within 2 days, kill or wound up to 50,000 civilians, and displace up to 5 million people. In the meantime, more Ukrainians are starting to pack emergency bags, plan escape routes, and learn basic survival and self-defense skills. And women have formed volunteer groups to craft camouflage nets for the military. What is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and why is Biden vowing to stop it if Russia invades Ukraine? The standoff returned to many the Russian view. Kremlin officials have focused on the 2015 Minsk peace deal, which was designed to end a conflict between Kyiv and Moscow-backed separatists in the contested Donbas region of eastern Ukraine, after the Russian annexation of Ukraine's Crimea Peninsula. The Kremlin has accused Ukrainian officials of not fulfilling their side of the agreement. The Kremlin also has sought assurances that Ukraine, a former Soviet state, never be allowed to join the NATO military alliance. In a December 17 ultimatum presented by the Kremlin to the United States, Russia said it wanted commitments that NATO would withdraw troops from countries that joined the alliance after 1997. At a joint news conference with Macron late Monday, Putin said Russia was categorically opposed to any expansion of NATO eastward because it poses a common threat to us. It's not us moving toward NATO, it's NATO moving toward us, he said. When it comes to Ukraine, what do Russian citizens actually want? The Ukrainian view. Officials in Kyiv have long criticized the Minsk peace deal, which was brokered after a string of military losses. They have said that they will support the agreement only if it is restructured. Still, officials say that they are open to talks with Russia, provided that they take place in a third country. Ukraine stands ready for negotiations in Istanbul, as well as in Geneva, Vienna or any other place that is impartial and doesn't depend on one of the sides, namely Russia. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov said last week, the Western view. The United States and other allies have said that they support the 2015 Minsk deal, but have called on all parties of the agreement, including Russia, to live up to their parts of the bargain. The Biden administration has rejected Russia's demands on NATO and instead has called for Russia to pull its forces back from the Ukrainian border and to stop supporting separatists in Donbas. After his meeting with Putin Monday, Macron said that NATO's open-door policy is essential. He added that the independence of former Soviet states such as Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova must be preserved. The military balance returned to many Russian troops. The Kremlin began moving troops to regions bordering Ukraine last year. Western officials say more than 100,000 Russian troops are in the region, and Crimea, the Ukrainian peninsula occupied by Russia since 2014. Russian military drills with its ally Belarus, which also borders Ukraine, are set to begin Thursday. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said Tuesday that Russian forces massed in Belarus would depart later this month. The Biden administration believes that Russia is planning to invade, possibly after Moscow creates a pretext by broadcasting staged images of civilian casualties to drum up anger against Kyiv. Separately, the British government has said that Russia plans to destabilize the Ukrainian government and install a pro-Russian leadership in its place. The most recent US assessment concluded that Russia has massed about 70% of the combat forces it would need to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine and attack Kyiv. If executed, the assault probably would be the largest land offensive in Europe since World War II. NATO forces. The United States has responded by sending more troops to Eastern Europe, with about 3,000 US personnel moving to NATO's eastern flank in Romania and Poland from their posts in Germany and Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Previously, the Pentagon put 8,500 US troops on heightened alert. NATO allies also have repositioned military hardware, with Denmark and Belgium sending F-15 and F-16 fighter jets to the Baltics last month. Britain has offered to send jets, warships and military specialists as well. NATO allies have said so far that they would not send troops to Ukraine in the event of an invasion. Even though Ukraine is at the center of the dispute between Russia and the West, it is not a NATO member and therefore is not covered by the alliance's collective defense clause. What about Ukraine? Ukraine's political leadership has largely downplayed the risk of conflict, with Zelensky telling Ukrainians to take a breath and calm down. But some Ukrainian commanders have offered a more forceful reaction. Zelensky also signed into law in February plans to strengthen the country's armed forces, bringing them from 250,000 active troops up to about 361,000. That is only about a third or so of Russia's 900,000 strong armed forces. On Sunday, a former defense minister of Ukraine, Andriy Zagorodnyk, called the situation pretty dire. He assessed that Russia had massed enough troops to occupy Kyiv or another city, but not enough to seize the entire country. All sides say that they are willing to talk. Last week, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan offered to mediate talks between Ukraine and Russia. His offer was greeted warmly by Zelensky, who was hosting the Turkish leader in Kyiv. Turkey is a member of NATO, but has maintained relations with Russia, even, controversially, buying Russian-made missile defense systems. In Moscow Monday, Macron said that he and Putin had a substantial exchange focused on current tensions and ways of de-escalation. The French leader appeared determined to strike a mediating tone, at one point referring to Russia as a neighbor and friend. Scholz, the German Chancellor, is to travel to Kyiv on February the 14th and to Moscow the next day. Why does Russia not want Ukraine to join NATO? Putin's warning of a full-scale war with Europe explained. Vladimir Putin has warned Europe and the West could be drawn into a full-scale war if Ukraine is permitted to join NATO.